911, what is your emergency? What is going on? What is going on? What is going on? Hello? What is going on? Who has a knife?
My sister, and I just woke up because I heard yelling.
Okay, this is your sister?
Yeah, and she's doing my mom with a knife. May you please tell her?
She's doing what to your mom with the knife? You need to take a deep breath for me so I can understand you.
No, I did. She's really killing my mom.
Sabrina Zunick was born in 1995 and faced hardship from an early age. Her biological parents were unable to provide a stable home, forcing her into the foster care system. As a teenager, she was placed with a foster family in Willoughby Hills, Ohio. Her new guardians, Kevin and Lisa Knofel, appeared to be caring and responsible parents. Kevin was a successful social worker, while Lisa devoted herself to raising their children and managing the household. The couple already had daughters of their own, and Sabrina soon became part of their family. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. Lisa made an effort to build a warm relationship with Sabrina, helping her adapt to her new home. However, as time passed, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. Emotionally fragile, Sabrina found herself drawn to Kevin, who showered her with attention, a kind of care she had long been deprived of. Gradually, Kevin began to manipulate her, deepening her dependence on him. He planted ideas in her mind, thoughts she might never have conceived on her own. This insidious influence marked the beginning of a chain of events that would soon spiral into horror. Sabrina quickly adjusted to life in the Knofel household. Lisa continued to care for her foster daughter, but her husband, Kevin, took on a more significant role in the girl's life. At first, his interest in her seemed harmless. He was friendly, affectionate, and engaging. He praised her, joked with her, and shared stories from his life. But over time, their relationship began to cross the boundaries of a father-daughter bond. Kevin recognized Sabrina's vulnerability. She lacked strong family ties and craved love and validation. He took advantage of this, making her feel special, irreplaceable. Their conversations grew increasingly personal, then intimate, until their relationship became romantic. With no real-life experience to guide her, Sabrina truly believed that Kevin loved her. Their affair remained a secret. Lisa, oblivious, continued to devote herself to her family. But before long, her presence became an inconvenience to Kevin. He subtly but persistently implanted the idea in Sabrina's mind that Lisa was the only obstacle standing between them, that the only way they could be together was to eliminate her. Completely under Kevin's spell, Sabrina began to take this idea seriously. She became convinced that once Lisa was gone, she and Kevin would be free to be together. By then, her thoughts were no longer her own. Her mind was clouded by his relentless manipulation. Thus began the preparations for a crime that would soon send shockwaves to the community. On the night of November 16, 2012, the Knofel home in Willoughby Hills lay in silence. Lisa went to bed, unaware that it would be her final night alive. Sabrina, fully under Kevin's influence, knew the moment had come. Armed with a knife, the 17-year-old entered Lisa's bedroom. The first strikes jolted Lisa awake, her screams piercing the night. She fought desperately to defend herself, but Sabrina's attack was relentless, fueled by a ferocity far beyond her years. Bleeding profusely, Lisa managed to escape the bedroom, stumbling into the hallway, leaving a trail of blood behind her. But Sabrina pursued her, striking again. Lisa fought for her life, but her strength was fading. The couple's children were in the house, and at least one of them heard the struggle. By the time it was over, Lisa had suffered 178 stab wounds. Her body lay motionless on the floor, drenched in blood. Sabrina stood over her, dazed, as police stormed into the house. Someone had called 911. When officers arrested Sabrina, she was in shock but did not resist. In the first moments, she barely spoke. Later, it would become clear she had no true grasp of the horror she had committed. In her mind, there was only one thought: Kevin was finally hers. Following her arrest, Sabrina Zanuck was taken to the police station for questioning. She was in a state of shock, her hands and clothes soaked in blood, her gaze vacant. Officers pressed her for a motive, but at first, she only repeated the same haunting phrase, "It had to be done." Meanwhile, Kevin Knofel arrived at the crime scene. He played the role of the devastated husband, expressing grief and demanding answers. However, detectives quickly took note of his demeanor. Despite the brutal murder of his wife, he appeared eerily composed. That night, Sabrina gave her first testimony. She admitted to killing Lisa but was reluctant to provide details. Only later, under mounting evidence, did she begin to speak about Kevin. Investigators soon uncovered the chilling truth. Kevin had spent months convincing Sabrina that Lisa was the only thing standing between them. He assured her that once his wife was gone, they could finally be together, free to live as they pleased. He also hinted at financial benefits. Lisa's life insurance policy was worth nearly $800,000. It became clear that Sabrina was not the sole culprit in this crime. The true mastermind was still at large. But to bring him to justice, detectives needed a full confession from Sabrina. And that was exactly what they would push for in the next interrogation.
What do you recall?
Yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
getting done with my homework, getting Tylenol, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And going to bed.
And we're at home.
Mm-hmm.
What, anything unusual happen?
I don't know. Everything went fine according to what I knew of.
Mm-hmm. What happened?
Starting from
when you got home from school yesterday.
No.
I got home, I went to dorm home. Then we had hamburger helper. And then I went back to doing my homework. Stayed doing my homework till like 1. I went upstairs, no, it was like 12. Went upstairs, tried to go to sleep. I couldn't go to sleep, so I went to go get some Advil.
Mm-hmm.
Ibuprofen. Because my head hurts, because I have really bad headaches. I don't really feel like it. And after that,
Where did you take ibuprofen from?
in they sang Kevin's bathroom. That's
Where?
where it's held. Kevin and Lisa's bedroom. That's where it's held.
Was Lisa still awake?
I don't know. I just remember going in there, having the bottle, starting to shake it to get the meds, and then I'm gone from there. Thank you.
Okay. Do you remember what the bottle said?
Ibuprofen.
Ibuprofen?
White, and there was orange around it.
Okay.
Are you allowed in the bathroom?
Only, to get Advil or something like that.
Uh-huh.
I call it Advil. It's always
Right.
ibuprofen. Other than that, no. Not unless they're there or, we're told to.
So what did Lisa say to you then, when she saw you in there?
Don't know. I don't know if
You
Lisa
didn't hear us?
No. I don't remember anything at that point on.
What do you remember?
Everything except,
Were you taking any illegal narcotics yesterday?
no. Don't do drugs.
You don't do drugs? When was the last time you did drugs?
3.5 years ago.
3.5 years ago? Okay. You have not had any illegal drugs since then? Okay. You were at home all night yesterday? Okay. After you ate dinner, did you have this opportunity to say goodbye to Kevin?
I was at the computer desk.
You're at the computer
I
desk?
don't know. I went to the living room also because I was printing my bracelet. I mean, I was in the living room, I was in the kitchen, and I was in the office. That's it. Excuse me. I mean, I believe so. Yeah, he just said bye because he always says bye to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then we either say bye, Chihuahua, Billy kisses him. Well,
Okay. You had an argument or anything with Lisa last night?
no,
No?
everything was fine. From what
Everything's
I
fine?
know.
Okay. Have you had these type of issues in the past where you just don't remember things?
I'm not positive. I mean, I know I was in other group homes. When I was in a fight with other people, I blacked out.
You mentioned you've had at your group home incidences where you blacked out. Have those been physical?
What do you mean?
Like, did you get in fights? People?
Yeah, but it wasn't me hitting them.
Mm-hmm.
If I get a blow to the head, I'm gone.
Mm-hmm.
So I fell with my head.
Have you hit people before and not
And I remembered it?
Like, in the blackout? Yes. But not, I don't start fights.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since my first group home, I was 14. I stopped fighting ever since then.
What do you think happened to your hands?
I don't know. I'm just saying that I'm being charged with homicide.
Well, we're investigating it.
I remember.
I'm pretty sure you do. Yeah.
And then,
Remember what you were doing prior to getting to the ambulance?
no,
In Lisa's room?
getting meds for my headache. And if I don't get it,
Mm-hmm. How do you get along with Tevin?
Kevin's a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's more the one that helps me out.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is Megan to deal with. Megan has mental instabilities herself.
Okay.
And so we made agreements a long time ago that if I need anything, that I can go to Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was major that she needed to be involved in, then he would ask, but not to be concerned about small things.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's already stressing her out. It's her job, and Haley, and Megan.
How about with Lisa? How do you get along with her?
Me and Lisa have never been the best.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've never tried to hurt her, never had any thoughts of hurting her. Yeah, it's been emotional and mental abuse from her to me.
Mm-hmm.
She put her hands on me, not fighting,
Mm-hmm.
but restraining me because I wouldn't give an iPod to her. And I don't know. I don't know. She never seemed to like me, and she's been wanting me out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on how Lisa is not alive now?
What?
What is your thoughts on that she is not alive? Maybe you didn't understand. That's what we're talking to you about.
She didn't kill me.
Mm-hmm.
This is dead.
You can't tell me I did it.
Yes.
Most of that blood was probably hers.
That's why we need you to concentrate and think about what happened. There's always two sides to every story, and we want to know what you had to say about it. And we know you were there. You know, there were officers that got to the house after they were called. So we just need you to focus on what happened. You know you were doing homework, and you know you got yourself to the bedroom to get the medicine. What you need to do now is bring it all together and think real hard about maybe what happened next. And then that'll explain how you got some wounds to your hands. Okay?
I've never been a murderer.
Mm-hmm.
We need to know, why we're asking you to think about it, we need to know how to help you, okay? We don't know that until we need to get some facts and find out what's going on. And that'll give us the best course on how to proceed from here and help you, help the family, and go on from there.
What do you want me to eat?
I don't.
We don't want you to say anything except the truth, and we just want you to think about it, because something happened by the time you were getting your meds in the bathroom there for your headache. then one of our police officers arriving. So something happened in between that time, and we're just trying to get to the truth of that and find out what happened.
I don't know. This is really dead.
Denise is dead. Sorry. And
Do we have a blanket already or none? You don't have a blanket? Oh my gosh. How'd that happen?
do you want to know what, I can tell you what's going to happen from here right now? I mean, do you have questions for me? I mean, you right, David?
Yeah.
I mean, or for right now, we're still doing our investigation, but you're under arrest. You know, Lisa's dead, and it appears that you're responsible for that at this time. So that's what the charge is going to be. But at that point, you're going to spend a weekend in jail, the county jail. We're not going to stay here all weekend. All right? And you'll have a court hearing probably on Monday. And at that time, they'll look to see if you have a bond and what to do. All right, for you.
With Sabrina's statements in hand, police began verifying her claims. The key challenge was proving that Kevin Knofel had indeed manipulated the girl and coerced her into murder. Investigators started by analyzing phone records and messages exchanged between Kevin and Sabrina. They uncovered hundreds of texts in which Kevin repeatedly described Lisa as an obstacle to their love. He also assured Sabrina that after Lisa's death, they would have a future together, both emotionally and financially secure. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source: Sabrina's cellmate. The woman revealed that in jail, Sabrina had confessed the full extent of Kevin's influence. He had not merely encouraged her but had pressured her relentlessly, making her believe that killing Lisa was the only way forward. Further evidence emerged when detectives discovered that Kevin had explicitly discussed methods of murder with Sabrina before the crime. He had insisted that it needed to look like a sudden attack. With this overwhelming proof, prosecutors felt confident enough to move forward. Soon after, Kevin Knofel was arrested and charged with solicitation of murder. Now, both he and Sabrina would face trial. The trial of Sabrina Zunick and Kevin Knofel became a media spectacle, drawing intense public interest. While Sabrina faced charges for the brutal killing of Lisa, her defense team argued that she was a victim herself, manipulated by a man who exploited her vulnerability and trust. During court proceedings, prosecutors presented damning evidence, including the text messages exchanged between Kevin and Sabrina. The messages left little doubt he had not only encouraged the crime but had actively planned it with her. Sabrina took the stand, recounting how Kevin had convinced her that Lisa stood in the way of their happiness. She admitted her guilt but emphasized that she had been under Kevin's psychological control. Kevin, however, denied all allegations. He insisted that Sabrina had acted alone and that he had no involvement in the murder. But the prosecution had more than enough to dismantle his claims. They presented additional witness testimonies, including that of Sabrina's cellmate and financial records confirming his potential motive. In the end, the verdict was decisive. Sabrina Zunick pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Kevin Knofel was convicted of solicitation of murder and received a life sentence. It was one of the most high-profile cases in Ohio's history, but its repercussions would be felt for years to come. Following her conviction, Sabrina Zunick was transferred to a women's correctional facility in Ohio, where she began serving her 30-year sentence. In a later interview, she expressed deep remorse, admitting that she now fully understood the weight of her actions. She described herself as having been under Kevin's complete influence, unable to see the reality of what she had done until it was too late. Kevin Knofel, now behind bars for life, continued to protest his innocence. He attempted to appeal his sentence, but the courts upheld the ruling, sealing his fate. This case became one of Ohio's most notorious crimes, exposing the devastating effects of manipulation and psychological coercion. It served as a stark warning of how easily trust can be exploited, leading to unimaginable consequences. Years later, the story of Sabrina Zunick remains a haunting reminder of the power of influence and the tragic price of blind devotion. Thus ended a saga that claimed Lisa Knofl's life and shattered countless others. Maricela Botelho, a 23-year-old woman from Seattle, Washington, was known for her curiosity, cheerful spirit, and love of freedom. In early October 2020, she traveled to Dallas, Texas, to visit her ex-boyfriend. What was supposed to be a brief weekend getaway turned into a tragedy that shook her loved ones and drew national attention. On the evening of October 10, 2020, Maricela spent her time exploring Dallas nightlife. Those who saw her later described her as happy and relaxed. That night, she visited Select Start, a popular bar in Deep Ellum, a district renowned for its vibrant nightlife. Surveillance footage captured her entering the bar around 10 p.m. She was alone, but it didn't seem to bother her. Maricela spent the evening mingling with patrons and dancing, enjoying herself to the fullest. She was last seen that same night. Security cameras recorded her leaving the bar around midnight, accompanied by a young man. Together, they walked to his car, parked nearby. This fleeting moment became a pivotal clue in the investigation that would begin days later, when her family realized something was terribly wrong. When Maricela failed to respond to calls and messages, her family grew alarmed. Known for her close relationships with family and friends, her sudden silence was deeply out of character. Her phone was turned off, and her social media accounts remained inactive. Even her ex-boyfriend, with whom she had planned to spend the weekend, had no idea of her whereabouts. As concern turned to fear, Maricela's family filed a missing persons report with the Dallas police. The investigation began with an analysis of her movements in the days leading up to her disappearance. The surveillance footage of her leaving the bar became the investigators' only concrete lead. Yet the identity of the man who left with her remained unknown, complicating the search. Police questioned bar patrons and nearby business owners, hoping to uncover new information. By mid-October, the search for Maricela Botelho gained momentum. Her family flew to Dallas to participate in the search personally. They distributed flyers with her photo, spoke to the media, and made heartfelt appeals on social media, pleading for help from the community. Maricela's father told reporters that his daughter had never gone missing before, and her uncharacteristic silence filled them with dread. "This is our worst nightmare," he said. Despite their tireless efforts, no updates on Maricela's whereabouts emerged. The case seemed to reach an impasse until the police made a crucial announcement: the man seen leaving the bar with her was now considered a person of interest in her disappearance. His car had been identified in surveillance footage from that night, but tracking him down proved more difficult than expected. This chapter in Maricela Botelho's disappearance was fraught with unanswered questions. Who was the man who accompanied her that night? What happened after they left the bar? It would take months for these mysteries to begin unraveling. In the meantime, her family could do nothing but wait and pray for a miracle. After Maricela Botelho was reported missing, the investigation into her disappearance began with a detailed review of her final evening. Surveillance footage from Select Start Bar remained the only thread connecting the events of that night. The footage showed Maricela leaving the bar with a man. His appearance, along with the car they drove away in, became the focus of the investigation. However, this provided no clear leads about Maricela's whereabouts. Her family refused to give up, tirelessly working to keep the public's attention on the case. They collaborated with the media, shared heartfelt appeals on social platforms, and distributed flyers bearing Maricela's image and details. Her father shared the pain of their ordeal with journalists. "We are living through unbearable agony, but we won't stop until we find out what happened to our daughter." Meanwhile, police questioned witnesses and bar patrons who might have known the man Maricela left with. Soon, detectives identified him as Charles Beltran, a Dallas resident. However, when they attempted to contact him, they discovered he had fled the city. His sudden disappearance raised serious suspicions, linking him further to Maricela's case. Investigators delved deeper into Beltran's actions on the night of her disappearance. A few days after she was reported missing, police obtained access to his cell phone records, which revealed he had left Texas shortly after that fateful evening. This revelation heightened their suspicions, but tracking him down proved difficult. Beltran seemed to be actively evading law enforcement. By this time, Maricela's disappearance had drawn widespread media attention, both locally and nationally. The story of a young woman vanishing under mysterious circumstances during a brief visit to another city struck a chord with many. Social media buzzed with posts urging anyone with information to come forward. Strangers offered their support and assistance to Maricela's family in their desperate search. The police pursued multiple theories, with the most plausible being that Maricela had fallen victim to a crime. Analyzing data from her cell phone added another layer to the case. Location records indicated that her phone had been switched off early on the morning of October 11th, just hours after she left the bar. Its last signal came from a suburban area near a highway, a secluded location that deepened investigators' fears. During their inquiries, police uncovered connections between Charles Beltran and two other individuals, Lisa Dykes and Nina Morano. These associates were known to spend time with Beltran and were believed to have been with him on the night of Maricela's disappearance. However, like Beltran, their whereabouts were unknown. It appeared all three were deliberately avoiding authorities. Weeks turned into months, with no significant breakthroughs in the case. For Maricela's family, the wait was excruciating. Her mother recalled, "Each day felt like an eternity. We didn't know if she was alive or not. All we wanted was the truth." Eventually, a tragic and horrifying discovery would bring the investigation to a critical turning point. Until then, Maricela's family and investigators remained determined to uncover the truth behind her disappearance. Months of uncertainty only deepened the anxiety of Maricela Botelho's family. Meanwhile, the Dallas police painstakingly pieced together the events of the night she vanished. The investigation focused on locating three primary suspects: Charles Beltran, Lisa Dykes, and Nina Morano. All three had disappeared shortly after Maricela went missing, a fact that pointed strongly to their potential involvement. Step by step, investigators uncovered new details. Utilizing cell phone data, detectives traced the movements of the suspects' phones on the night of Maricela's disappearance. The records revealed that the phones of Beltran, Dykes, and Aide were in the same area of suburban Dallas on the night Maricela's device stopped transmitting. These findings became pivotal in identifying the possible location of the crime. A major breakthrough came with the discovery of Charles Beltran's vehicle, abandoned in a semi-deserted Dallas neighborhood. Upon inspection, investigators noted unusual traces in the trunk. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the stains were blood belonging to Maricela Botelho, definitively linking Beltran to her disappearance. The collected evidence enabled police to file preliminary charges of kidnapping and murder. However, apprehending the suspects remained a formidable challenge. Authorities suspected that Beltran, Dykes, and Aide were deliberately evading capture, possibly hiding in different states. Arrest warrants were issued, and their names entered into the National Fugitive Database. Appealing to the public through media outlets became a key strategy in the search. Police departments nationwide were instructed to remain vigilant for any leads regarding the suspects. Meanwhile, photographs and descriptions of the three fugitives were widely circulated in the news. Journalists published reports, and volunteers distributed flyers, urging anyone with information to come forward. The situation shifted in early March 2021, when one of the suspects, Lisa Dykes, was apprehended. She was found in a Dallas suburb after neighbors reported seeing someone matching her description entering an abandoned house. Though Dykes initially denied any connection to Maricela's disappearance, her statements quickly raised suspicions. During questioning, she contradicted herself multiple times and avoided direct answers about the night in question. Detectives pressed forward, leveraging the evidence they had and new information obtained from Dykes. Her arrest set off a chain reaction. Within weeks, police located the second suspect, Nina Morano, in Utah at the end of March 2021. Like Dykes, Aide vehemently denied any involvement in the murder, but authorities believed he knew more than he was willing to admit. Charles Beltran, considered the central figure in the case, evaded capture the longest. Police suspected his direct involvement in Maricella's death. His arrest finally occurred in April 2021, 6 months after Maricella's disappearance, when Mexican authorities assisted in tracking him down. His extradition to the United States marked the culmination of the manhunt. With all 3 suspects in custody, the investigation reached a turning point. Police had amassed enough evidence to charge them with Maricela Botello's murder. Yet one question remained unanswered: what truly happened on the night she disappeared? The answers, which would emerge during interrogations and courtroom proceedings, promised to unveil a grim truth that would shock both Maricella's family and the public. The tragic conclusion arrived on March 18, 2021, when the remains of a young woman were discovered in a wooded area in Wilbarger County, Texas. A local resident stumbled upon the partially buried body while walking through the area. Police were dispatched, and initial observations suggested that the remains could belong to Maricela Botello. Confirmation came days later, when forensic experts used DNA analysis to identify the body. The grim news devastated Maricella's family: she was dead. According to the medical examiner, her death had resulted from multiple stab wounds inflicted with a sharp object, leaving no doubt that she had been murdered. For the Botello family, the revelation was a crushing blow, though they had prepared for the worst after months of uncertainty. She was so kind and caring. "We will never recover from this loss," Maricella's mother said in an interview. For her and the rest of the family, justice became their only solace, and they were determined to see the perpetrators behind bars. By this point, Charles Beltran, Lisa Dykes, and Nina Morano were all under arrest, and police continued to build their case. Investigators determined that on the night of Maricella's disappearance, she had left a bar with Beltran and ended up at a house he shared with Dykes and Aide. According to prosecutors, the 3 suspects were complicit in her murder, which occurred shortly after she arrived at the residence. Lisa Dykes' testimony played a pivotal role in shedding light on the crime. As part of a cooperation agreement, she admitted to key details of the night Maricela vanished. Dykes claimed that an argument broke out between Beltran and Maricela, which escalated into violence. She also confessed that both she and Nina Morano helped cover up the crime after it was committed. Another critical piece of evidence was a carpet recovered from the suspect's home, which contained blood matching Maricela's DNA. Experts concluded that the murder had occurred in the house, after which her body was transported to Wilbarger County and buried. In April 2021, Beltran, Dykes, and Aide were formally charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to conceal a crime, and unlawful transportation of a body. Each faced the possibility of life in prison. Prosecutors argued that Beltran was the primary instigator of the crime, with Aide and Dykes assisting him in an attempt to escape detection. During the trial, the prosecution emphasized Dykes' testimony, along with the physical evidence, blood in Beltran's car, traces on the carpet, and geolocation data. The suspects' attempts to erase their tracks fleeing Texas, destroying evidence, and lying during initial inquiries further underscored their culpability. They knew what they had done and tried to eliminate all proof, a police representative stated. Amid the revelations, Maricela Botello's case became a harrowing reminder of how quickly a promising young life can be cut short. For her family, however, the priority remained clear: to achieve justice and ensure that those responsible faced the full consequences of their actions. The arrests and discovery of Maricela Botello's body set the stage for a high-profile trial that captivated public attention and became one of Texas's most discussed cases in 2021. The trial commenced in mid 2021, with prosecutors formally presenting charges against Charles Beltran, Lisa Dykes, and Nina Morano. Charles Beltran stood as the central figure in the case, accused of orchestrating the crime. Prosecutors alleged that he was the driving force behind Maricella's murder. They argued that the events leading to her death began when Beltran and Maricela left the bar together and escalated into a fatal conflict after they arrived at his residence. According to the prosecution, Beltran inflicted the fatal stab wounds and subsequently enlisted Dykes and aide to help dispose of the body. Lisa Dykes' testimony became a pivotal element in the trial. After her arrest, she accepted a plea deal, agreeing to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony provided a detailed account of the night Maricela was killed. Dykes described how Beltran panicked after the murder and pressured both her and aide to assist in transporting the body out of the house to bury it. She claimed that fear of defying Beltran drove their actions. Prosecutors presented a wealth of evidence, including geolocation data that placed all three suspects in the vicinity where Maricela's body was later discovered. Forensic experts corroborated this with DNA evidence, confirming that the bloodstains found on the carpet and in Beltran's car matched Maricela's DNA. Combined, the evidence painted a compelling picture of the suspect's guilt. The defense, however, sought to challenge key elements of the prosecution's case. Beltran's attorneys argued that his actions were not premeditated, suggesting that the fatal conflict may have been an impulsive act rather than a calculated crime. Meanwhile, Dykes and aide's lawyers contended that their clients were coerced into cooperating with Beltran and had no direct involvement in the murder itself. Despite these efforts, the prosecution's narrative held firm. The trial was marked by emotional statements from Maricela's family, who delivered heartfelt appeals for justice. Her mother addressed the court, saying, "No punishment can bring our daughter back, but we want those responsible to be held accountable for what they have done. They didn't just take her life, they destroyed ours as well." After several days of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict. Charles Beltran was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Lisa Dykes received a 25-year sentence for her role in concealing the crime, while Nina Morano was sentenced to 30 years for his involvement. Maricela's family expressed satisfaction with the outcome of the trial but acknowledged that no sentence could ever fill the void left by her loss. "We hoped she would come home, that we could embrace her again, but instead, we had to face a very different reality," Maricela's sister said in a post-trial interview. Following the conclusion of the trial, Maricela Botelho's family dedicated themselves to preserving her memory and working to prevent similar tragedies. They established a foundation to support families of missing persons, providing legal assistance and raising awareness about personal safety. Speaking to the media, her mother emphasized their hope that their painful experience might serve as a lesson to others. "We don't want anyone else to endure the agony we have felt," she said in an interview. She stressed that Maricela's case should remind everyone of the importance of vigilance, particularly when it comes to women's safety in unfamiliar environments. Maricela's story sparked a broader conversation about women's safety in society. In Dallas and beyond, activists launched campaigns to enhance public safety in nightlife settings. Proposals included installing more surveillance cameras, improving lighting in high-traffic areas, and training bar and restaurant staff to recognize and respond to suspicious situations. The Dallas Police Department also reviewed its response protocols for missing persons cases. Criticism regarding initial delays in Maricela's investigation prompted the department to implement new procedures aimed at expediting search efforts. A department spokesperson admitted that the case had been a sobering lesson for the entire system, vowing to prevent similar missteps in the future. Nationally, Maricela's story resonated deeply. People across the country shared her story, posted her photos, and called for her memory to be honored. The hashtag Justice for Maricela became a symbol of the fight for justice and a stark reminder of life's fragility. Her family chose to focus on the positive memories of Maricela. Her sister described her as a radiant soul who lit up every room she entered. "We want to remember her as someone full of life, kindness, and love. At memorial events held in her honor, friends and relatives recounted stories of her generosity, her laughter, and her love for travel. The tragedy not only transformed her family's lives but also influenced societal awareness of safety issues. Maricella's case became a powerful reminder of the importance of looking out for one another and acting swiftly when danger arises. Her family hopes her story will be the last in a chain of such heartbreaking events. As the Botelho family continues to honor Maricella's legacy, her case stands as a testament to how perseverance and the dedication of investigators can bring justice, even in the darkest of circumstances. Yet justice, though served, cannot undo the profound loss. Today, Maricella's name is not only a symbol of grief but also a call to action, an appeal for change, a plea for greater vigilance, and a commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Her story reminds us all that no life should be forgotten, and no truth, no matter how painful, should remain hidden. She was young, talented, and beloved by many. Ellie Week led a seemingly ordinary life until one man turned her days into a living nightmare. Stalking, threats, disappearance, and a chilling discovery that shook the peaceful town to its core. Who could commit such a crime? And why were her cries for help left unheard? This story will leave no heart untouched. Ellie Week was a young woman brimming with life and vitality. Born in the quiet suburb of Mason, Ohio, she stood out for her kindness and sociable nature. At just 23, Ellie had already earned a degree in graphic design and embarked on a promising career with a small company. Her friends described her as a creative soul, passionate about art, music, and photography. She adored nature walks, often capturing breathtaking shots of local landscapes, which she shared on her social media. Ellie's family was a cornerstone of her life. Her parents supported her every endeavor, while her younger sister admired her as a role model. Ellie was also deeply engaged in her community, frequently participating in charity events and lending a hand in local volunteer projects. But behind her bright demeanor lay a battle with a relentless stalker. For nearly a year, Ellie endured unwanted attention from Michael Strauss, a man she had met at a local event. Michael persistently sought to force a connection, sending her messages, appearing at places she frequented, and reacting with hostility when rebuffed. Despite this, Ellie tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, hoping the ordeal would eventually end. On July 2, 2019, the day of Ellie's disappearance began like any other. That morning, she met a friend at a cafe before heading out for a stroll in a local park. She was last seen around 4 p.m., walking in the direction of her home. After that, Ellie vanished without a trace. Her phone went silent, raising alarm among her loved ones. When Ellie failed to return that evening, her family immediately began searching for her. Calls to friends and acquaintances, social media posts, and even local searches yielded no clues. There was no sign of her whereabouts. That night, Ellie's parents filed a missing person report with the police. Thus began a case that would shake the tight-knit community of Mason and grow into one of the most harrowing criminal investigations in the state's history. After Ellie's family filed the missing person report, the police wasted no time launching an investigation. Their first step was to interview her family and friends. They learned that Ellie had made no plans to leave town or meet anyone on the day she vanished. Phone records revealed that her last call had been to a friend, placed roughly an hour before she went missing. A massive search effort was soon underway. Friends, volunteers, and police officers combed through local parks, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings, focusing on places Ellie frequented. The search continued for several days but yielded no clues. Meanwhile, investigators began scrutinizing individuals who might have been connected to her disappearance. Among the first suspects was Michael Strauss, whose name surfaced during interviews with Ellie's loved ones. They described his persistent stalking, menacing messages, and threats. When questioned, Michael denied any involvement, insisting he hadn't seen Ellie that day. However, His behavior aroused suspicion. On the 7th day after Ali's disappearance, police reviewed footage from surveillance cameras in the park. One recording showed Ali walking along a trail, followed minutes later by a man resembling Michael Strauss. This footage marked the first crucial breakthrough in the case. The public followed the investigation closely. Social media posts about Ali's disappearance spread rapidly, with posters of her photograph plastered across the town. Local news outlets provided daily updates, and the community rallied to support her family. Yet, as the days passed with no word of Ali, anxiety and despair deepened. 2 weeks after Ali vanished, tragedy struck. A farmer working in a field near a dense wooded area made a grim discovery: human remains. Investigators soon confirmed they belonged to Ali Week. Her body had been found hidden in thick underbrush, roughly 10 kilometers from where she was last seen. At the site, police uncovered critical evidence: fragments of clothing and signs of a struggle. Forensic analysis determined that Ali had died from asphyxiation, and injuries on her body indicated foul play. This shocking discovery altered the trajectory of the investigation, presenting the detectives with an urgent mission to identify and bring the perpetrator to justice. The discovery of Ali Week's body sent shockwaves through the community. The town of Mason, once considered a haven of safety, was now gripped by a mix of grief and unease. For Ali's family, the news was the confirmation of their worst fears, ones they had desperately tried to dismiss during the 2 agonizing weeks of searching. The police immediately cordoned off the site where Ali's remains were found, ensuring the preservation of all potential evidence. Forensic experts meticulously examined the area, documenting every small detail: fragments of fabric, potential footprints, fibers, and traces of soil. These objects became the starting point for building a forensic timeline. Identification of the remains was expedited by personal belongings found nearby. DNA testing later confirmed the body as Ali's. Her family was informed as soon as the process was complete, a devastating moment for them, yet they chose to cooperate fully with the police in their pursuit of justice. The autopsy report provided detectives with crucial insights. Ali's cause of death was asphyxiation, with distinct marks on her neck suggesting the use of a belt or similar object. Scratches and bruises on her body indicated a desperate struggle against her attacker. Experts concluded that she had been killed within hours of her disappearance, making it clear she had been murdered the same day she was last seen. The evidence collected at the crime scene raised more questions than answers. Some items, such as fragments of fabric, did not belong to Ali, hinting at the involvement of a third party or the presence of witnesses. A strand of long, dark hair found near her body was sent for DNA analysis, with the hope of linking it to a suspect. Michael Strauss remained a primary suspect, with mounting testimony regarding his stalking and threatening behavior toward Ali. During another interrogation, Michael again denied involvement, claiming he had been at home on the day of Ali's disappearance. However, his alibi could not be fully corroborated. Surveillance footage from the park, showing a man resembling Michael following Ali, added to the suspicion surrounding him. A breakthrough came when the DNA from the hair found at the scene matched Michael Strauss. This discovery was a significant step forward in the investigation. Still, detectives knew they needed more evidence to secure an arrest. Surveillance on Michael intensified as the police awaited further leads or mistakes that could tie him definitively to the crime. Simultaneously, investigators explored other possibilities. Neighbors and potential witnesses were interviewed, though much of the case remained shrouded in uncertainty. Nevertheless, a clear strategy emerged: to amass irrefutable evidence, bring Ali's killer to justice, and ensure the community could begin to heal from this horrific tragedy. After the discovery of Ali Week's body, the investigation honed in on gathering irrefutable evidence against the prime suspect Michael Strauss. Detectives meticulously reconstructed his movements on the day of Ali's disappearance. Cellular data analysis revealed that Michael's phone had been in the vicinity of the park where Ali was last seen and later via the wooded area where her body was found. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the evidence collected at the crime scene. Fibers discovered on Ellie's clothing matched the upholstery of Michael's car seats, providing a crucial link. Additionally, soil particles found on the floor mats of Michael's vehicle were identical to samples from the forested area where Ellie's body was discovered. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, investigators continued to solidify their case. A search warrant for Michael's home revealed chilling findings: notebooks containing entries about Ellie, photographs he had taken while stalking her, and a belt with a damaged buckle. Forensic analysis later confirmed that this belt matched the marks found on Ellie's neck, potentially identifying it as the murder weapon. Michael Strauss was arrested on July 25, 2019. His apprehension marked a turning point in the case, eliciting mixed reactions from the community. While many residents felt a sense of relief, Michael's family vehemently denied his guilt, claiming the police had targeted him as an easy scapegoat. During his initial interrogation, Michael remained calm but evasive, continuing to deny any involvement. He insisted that the evidence against him had been fabricated. However, the investigation steadily closed in on him with each passing day. A major breakthrough came when police gained access to Michael's digital devices. Analysis of his computer and phone revealed months of troubling online searches, including queries about methods to conceal a body and detailed studies of other high-profile murders. His email history contained dozens of unsent messages to Ellie, some pleading for a meeting, others filled with threats and obsessive remarks. These digital findings became the foundation for formally charging Michael Strauss. The prosecution filed charges of kidnapping, stalking, and premeditated murder. Michael's defense attorney argued that there was no direct evidence tying him to the act of murder itself, but the judge ruled to keep him in custody pending trial. Local media followed the case closely, sparking heated debates within the community. While some were convinced of Michael's guilt, others questioned the reliability of the evidence. For Ellie's family, his arrest represented a step toward justice, though the looming trial promised a long and painful battle ahead. The trial of Michael Strauss began in October 2019 and immediately drew widespread public attention. The courtroom was packed with journalists, community members, and Ellie Weeks' friends. Her family attended every session, determined not to miss a single detail. For them, this was not only a quest for justice but also an effort to honor Ellie's memory and restore her dignity. The prosecution presented a compelling case, building on a foundation of substantial evidence. Cell phone data placed Michael in locations directly tied to Ellie's disappearance and murder. Forensic experts meticulously detailed the fibers, soil traces, and microscopic particles found in Michael's car, all matching samples taken from the crime scene. Prosecutors also focused on Michael's psychological fixation on Ellie. Emails and messages he had sent her were read aloud in court. One message, sent shortly before her disappearance, contained a chilling threat: "If you don't respond, I'll come myself, and then you'll see what I'm capable of." This statement became a cornerstone of the prosecution's argument, illustrating his premeditated intent. Witnesses for the prosecution included Ellie's friends, who testified about her fear of Michael, as well as forensic experts who linked the evidence to the defendant. Neighbors of Michael added to the damning testimony, recalling his suspicious behavior on the day of Ellie's disappearance. They described seeing him return home visibly agitated and meticulously cleaning his car the following day. The defense sought to cast doubt on the evidence, arguing that much of it was circumstantial. Michael's attorney claimed the fibers and soil could have been transferred accidentally and that cell phone data only proved his presence near the park, not his involvement in the crime. The defense also emphasized the lack of eyewitnesses directly connecting Michael to the murder. The trial's pivotal moment came with the DNA evidence. Genetic analysis of the hair found at the crime scene and skin cells on the belt used to strangle Ellie conclusively identified Michael Strauss as the perpetrator. The defense challenged the validity of the DNA results, alleging potential errors in the lab's procedures, but the court dismissed these claims as unfounded. Defense witnesses failed to sway the jury, and Michael himself declined to testify, invoking his Fifth Amendment right. This decision sparked mixed reactions. The prosecution framed it as a tacit admission of guilt, while the defense argued it was a strategic move to avoid missteps under intense scrutiny. The trial spanned 6 weeks, during which more than 20 witnesses were called and a multitude of evidence was presented. Closing arguments were emotionally charged. The prosecutor called for the maximum penalty, arguing that Michael's actions were cold-blooded and deliberate. The defense maintained that the evidence was insufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Michael Strauss was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and stalking. Following the verdict, the judge scheduled a sentencing hearing. Ellie Weeks' family awaited justice, knowing that no punishment could ever bring their daughter back. The people of Mason, shaken by the horrific crime that had shattered their tranquil town, hoped for a sentence that would reflect the severity of the act and provide a sense of closure. During the hearing, the prosecution sought the harshest punishment, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The prosecutor underscored the calculated nature of Michael Strauss's actions, the terror he had inflicted on Ellie during months of stalking, and the irrevocable loss her family suffered. Ellie Week was robbed of her right to live, dream, and find happiness. The defendant must be held fully accountable for his actions, the prosecutor declared. In delivering the sentence, the judge echoed the prosecution's arguments, condemning Michael's cold-blooded disregard for human life. Michael Strauss was sentenced to life without parole, with additional sentences for kidnapping and stalking further reinforcing the gravity of his punishment. The courtroom reaction was intense. Ellie's family wept, holding on to one another as they processed a mixture of grief and relief. While they found solace in the fact that justice had been served, their loss remained immeasurable. Michael, on the other hand, maintained his emotionless demeanor, a stoic expression that had persisted throughout the trial. The community welcomed the sentence with a sense of satisfaction. Messages of support for the Week family flooded social media, praising the efforts of the police and prosecution. However, the case also sparked broader discussions about how such a tragedy might have been prevented. Ellie Week's story drew attention to the pervasive issue of stalking. Many highlighted the inadequacies in the existing system designed to protect victims. Ellie's family, determined to make a difference, launched a campaign advocating for changes to Ohio's laws. They pushed for harsher penalties for stalking, better protective measures for victims, and streamlined processes for obtaining restraining orders. Months after the trial concluded, Ohio passed a legislative amendment known as Ellie's Law. The law increased penalties for stalking and expanded victims' rights to secure legal protection. For Ellie's family, the law represented a step toward ensuring that no other family would have to endure the same heartbreak. Michael Strauss's fate was sealed, but Ellie Week's legacy continued to resonate. Her story became a lasting reminder for the residents of Mason, a stark warning of the dangers of unchecked stalking and a testament to the power of a community united in the pursuit of safety and justice. After the trial concluded, Ellie Week's family and friends devoted themselves to preserving her memory. Through events and projects, they sought not only to honor her life but also to raise awareness about the dangers of stalking and violence. In June 2020, exactly 1 year after Ellie's disappearance, a memorial was installed in the park where she was last seen. A small marble plaque bore her portrait alongside the inscription, "In memory of a radiant soul who will forever remain in our hearts." May her story inspire us to protect one another. The memorial became a place of quiet reflection, often adorned with flowers and candles left by loved ones and strangers moved by her story. Ellie's family also established a charitable foundation in her name. The Ellie Week Memorial Foundation provided support to victims of stalking, offering legal aid, counseling, and financial assistance. The foundation was funded through crowdfunding efforts and annual events, including marathons, auctions, and benefit concerts. At the college where Ellie had studied, a scholarship for graphic design students was created in her honor. This scholarship supported talented young artists who shared Ellie's passion for creativity. Each year, during the scholarship award ceremony, Ellie's parents gave heartfelt speeches about her life, dreams, and the indelible impact she had on those around her. Ellie's story resonated across the nation. Her name became synonymous with legislative changes aimed at combating stalking. Documentaries, podcasts, and articles chronicled her case, emphasizing the importance of recognizing early warning signs of danger and seeking help promptly. For Ellie's family, the enactment of Ellie's Law was a bittersweet achievement. They had worked closely with lawmakers and legal experts to shape the legislation. The law introduced harsher penalties for stalking and provided law enforcement with expanded powers to intervene in such cases, ensuring greater protection for victims. Years after the tragedy, the Week family found the strength to move forward while keeping Ellie's memory alive. They remembered her as a kind and vibrant individual who inspired those around her. Their advocacy efforts led to greater public awareness of violence and a critical need to support victims. Ellie Week's story became a poignant reminder of how one life can influence the world. Her memory lives on in the hearts of her loved ones, in the laws that now protect others, and in every person whose sense of safety and hope was restored through her legacy. She vanished quietly, as if dissolving into thin air. She left behind her home, her children, and unfinished conversations. For those close to her, it was a shock Jamie Haggard would never have disappeared without an explanation. Week after week, the search gave way to despair, and then to horror. A forest trail, a suitcase, the acrid scent of something burned. Questions multiplied, yet answers remained elusive. What happened to Jamie? Who could have done such a thing? This story begins with a shadow but unravels a mystery that will leave everyone shaken. Jamie Haggard, a young woman from the small town of Kenmore, Washington, was known for her kind-hearted nature and unwavering devotion to her family. Her life was fraught with challenges, yet she never gave up on her dream of building a stable future for her daughters. Despite her struggles, Jamie maintained warm relationships with many of those around her and worked hard to keep her optimism intact. By 2016, Jamie was living with her stepbrother, David Haggard. The family was caught in a web of difficulties, financial strain, tense familial relationships, and a pervasive sense of uncertainty. While she shared a bond with her stepbrother, their relationship was far from harmonious. Some of Jamie's acquaintances claimed she feared David, suspecting him of having a violent streak. A devoted mother to her two daughters, Jamie's life revolved around caring for them. However, she rarely confided in others, making it difficult for anyone to truly understand her emotional state. Even with these complexities, her sudden disappearance in 2016 shocked everyone who knew her. Her children, friends, and neighbors later described Jamie as someone who would never abandon her daughters without reason. This became a cornerstone of the initial investigation into her disappearance. Jamie appeared to be an ordinary woman living in a quiet suburb. Yet beneath the veneer of stability lay dark family secrets that began to surface only after she went missing. June 9, 2016, began like any other day for Jamie Haggard. Her children were at home, and her stepbrother David was occupied with his own activities. None of the neighbors noticed anything unusual. However, by evening, Jamie had vanished without a trace. When her loved ones tried to contact her, Jamie's phone was turned off, something entirely out of character for her, as she always stayed reachable for her daughters. At first, her friends and family assumed she might have left for personal reasons, but her sudden silence raised alarm. A few days later, Jamie's worried mother reported her disappearance to the police. She revealed that in the months leading up to the incident, Jamie had expressed concerns about her relationship with David. According to her mother, David often displayed aggressive behavior, and Jamie feared it could one day lead to tragedy. At the time, however, these fears were mere suspicions, with no concrete evidence for the police to act upon. Initial searches yielded no results. Investigators searched the home where Jamie lived but found no signs of a struggle or violence. Questioning neighbors and acquaintances failed to clarify the situation. The only clue came from a few witnesses who claimed to have seen Jamie near her home on the day she disappeared. One reported spotting her with a man whose appearance resembled David's. In the first weeks after her disappearance, the police were unable to officially name David as a suspect. His statements seemed consistent, and he maintained that he had no knowledge of his sister's whereabouts. However, investigators noticed peculiarities in his demeanor. He appeared to avoid discussing Jamie and often gave evasive answers. As days turned into weeks, the worry among Jamie's friends and family grew. She remained missing, with no communication or traces left behind. Her disappearance was a complete mystery, and law enforcement continued to search for even the smallest lead that might shed light on what had happened. Following the report of Jamie Haggard's disappearance, the Snohomish County Police intensified their search efforts. Investigators began by examining Jamie's social circle, paying particular attention to her family. David Haggard, her stepbrother, immediately drew police scrutiny. However, he insisted he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. While investigators probed the circumstances, Jamie's friends and family launched their own search efforts. They posted flyers with her photo, organized volunteer groups, and combed through the surrounding areas. Everyone who knew Jamie agreed she would never leave her daughters behind voluntarily. This belief became a driving force in the pursuit of the truth. Detectives concentrated on piecing together the final weeks of Jamie's life. They uncovered that in the months prior to her disappearance, Jamie had frequently mentioned the strained relationship with David. She described him as prone to anger over trivial matters, and his behavior instilled a growing sense of fear. Some friends reported that Jamie was even considering moving to escape the tension with her stepbrother. However, there was no direct evidence linking David to Jamie's disappearance. Moreover, he maintained an air of composure, suggesting that she might have left of her own accord. Despite this, police documented inconsistencies in his account, such as discrepancies in dates and timelines. A significant step in the investigation involved tracing Jamie's electronic footprint. Detectives attempted to track her phone, but it had been powered off. The last recorded signal originated near her home, which offered little clarity but confirmed suspicions that her disappearance likely occurred close by. The investigation faced obstacles. David continued to live in the shared house and outright refused to grant permission for a more thorough search. Without a warrant, the police were unable to conduct an extensive examination of the property, delaying progress. This limitation frustrated Jamie's relatives, who increasingly doubted David's sincerity. With each passing day, the hope of finding Jamie alive dwindled. Yet, law enforcement remained determined to uncover the truth. All they needed was one critical piece of evidence to break the case open. As the investigation deepened, detectives increasingly focused on David Haggard. Jamie's relatives and friends described a relationship that had grown increasingly tense in the months leading up to her disappearance. They recounted incidents where David displayed aggression, and Jamie often confided her fear of being alone in the house with him. A close friend emerged as a key witness, revealing that Jamie had expressed a desire to move out multiple times. However, her financial dependence on David and his control over their shared resources kept her trapped. This detail became increasingly significant as suspicions mounted. In May 2016, just a month before her disappearance, Jamie confided in a friend that she feared for her life. She worried that her conflicts with David might escalate into something far worse. Though these concerns had not been documented previously, they later became a vital part of the case. David, meanwhile, maintained that he had no knowledge of Jamie's whereabouts. He insisted she might have left voluntarily, citing personal issues she allegedly kept hidden from others. Yet these claims struck detectives as implausible, given the numerous testimonies about Jamie's devotion to her daughters and her reluctance to leave them without explanation. Adding to the suspicions were changes in David's behavior after Jamie's disappearance. Neighbors reported that he had become reclusive, and on several occasions, a strange smell was noticed emanating from his home. However, without a warrant, police were unable to search the property thoroughly. Over time, the mounting tension around the case prompted investigators to seek court approval for a search of the house Jamie had shared with David. However, the request was denied, as there was no direct evidence implicating him. The lack of new leads created an atmosphere of frustration and despair. Detectives understood, however, that if David were truly involved, he would likely make a mistake eventually. Over the following months, they kept a close watch, waiting for any opportunity to uncover the truth about Jamie's fate. 2 years after Jamie Haggard's disappearance, in May 2018, the case took an unexpected and grim turn. In a wooded area near a highway in Snohomish County, hunters discovered a suitcase. Inside were charred and dismembered human remains, immediately drawing the attention of authorities. A forensic examination confirmed the worst fears: the remains belonged to Jamie Haggard. The cause of death was determined to be violent, and the condition of the body indicated that the perpetrator had tried to conceal the crime using fire. The suitcase, investigators found, had once belonged to David Haggard. For Jamie's family, the discovery was devastating. They had clung to hope that she was still alive despite the years of silence. Now, they faced the harsh reality that her story had ended in tragedy, sparking a new chapter, one focused on justice. The discovery of Jamie's remains became a pivotal moment in the investigation. It allowed police to intensify their efforts to uncover the circumstances of her murder. David, already under suspicion, became the primary focus. However, he avoided arrest in the months that followed, as police still lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. Detectives worked to piece together the sequence of events that led to Jamie's remains being left in the woods. Analysis of the suitcase and the remains suggested they had been abandoned shortly after her disappearance. The location was not far from a route David frequently traveled, further raising suspicion. A crucial piece of evidence was a length of rope found near the body. Forensic experts determined that the material matched rope previously seen in David's home. Yet, even this wasn't enough to warrant an immediate arrest. Investigators continued building their case, determined to connect the dots. Meanwhile, the public, horrified by the grim discovery, began pressuring authorities for justice. Local residents and activists demanded accountability for Jamie's death, and her name became a rallying cry for the fight against domestic violence. The emergence of new physical evidence became a turning point for the case. Investigators knew they had to leave no stone unturned to bring closure to Jamie's family and ensure her killer faced justice. By October 2019, investigators had gathered enough evidence to arrest David Haggard. Police charged him with second-degree murder in the case of Jamie Haggard. The decision to detain him came after months of meticulous work, including evidence analysis, witness interviews, and a thorough review of all data related to the case. A critical breakthrough came when physical evidence from the scene matched items found in David's home. Experts confirmed that the suitcase containing Jamie's remains had belonged to him. Furthermore, fingerprints on the rope used to bind her body were identified as David's. These findings were pivotal in securing a warrant for his arrest. David was apprehended at his home, where he denied all charges. He claimed he knew nothing about Jamie's death and suggested that someone was trying to frame him. However, his behavior raised suspicions. He appeared overly anxious, contradicted himself, and struggled to provide a clear account of his whereabouts on the day Jamie disappeared. Interrogations with David became a cornerstone of the investigation. Video recordings of these sessions, later made public, revealed how detectives methodically questioned him about his relationship with Jamie and the events of June 9, 2016. At one point, David displayed visible irritation when confronted with the discovery of Jamie's remains, further fueling suspicions of his involvement. Meanwhile, investigators continued gathering additional evidence. Neighbors, co-workers, and acquaintances of David were interviewed. Several recalled him complaining about Jamie and their frequent arguments. These testimonies strengthened the prosecution's case. David's arrest marked a significant step forward, but proving his guilt in court remained a formidable challenge. Prosecutors prepared to present the evidence they believed definitively implicated him. Jamie's family received the news of the arrest with a mixture of relief and resolve, knowing it was only the beginning of their pursuit of justice. The public, deeply invested in the case, followed developments closely. Jamie's story reignited conversations about domestic violence, systemic inaction, and the protracted nature of criminal investigations. Her case became a stark reminder of the importance of addressing warning signs within families. The next stage was the trial, where the prosecution would need to convince a jury of David's guilt and ensure he faced justice for Jamie's death. David Haggard's trial began in mid-2022 with the charge of second-degree murder for the killing of Jamie Haggard. The case drew widespread public attention as the community awaited the resolution of a tragedy that had haunted them for years. The prosecution presented a comprehensive narrative based on physical evidence and witness testimony. Central to their case were key pieces of evidence: the suitcase containing Jamie's remains, the rope bearing David's fingerprints, and forensic analysis indicating that fire had been used to destroy evidence. Prosecutors emphasized David's control over the home Jamie lived in and his access to the items used in the crime. Video recordings of David's interrogations became a focal point of the trial. In them, he repeatedly contradicted himself, avoided direct questions, and appeared increasingly agitated when asked about Jamie's remains. Prosecutors argued that his behavior betrayed a sense of guilt. They also highlighted his well-documented conflicts with Jamie, suggesting a clear motive for the crime. David's defense centered on denying involvement. His lawyers argued that the evidence was circumstantial and insufficient to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They suggested that the suitcase could have been planted and that the rope, accessible to many, did not conclusively tie David to the crime. The defense also painted David as a victim of public bias, claiming the case against him was built on assumptions rather than facts. The trial's emotional peak came with the testimonies of Jamie's friends and family. Witnesses recounted her fear of David and his volatile nature. Jamie's mother gave a heartfelt statement, describing her daughter's dedication to her children and asserting that she would never have left them willingly. Her words left a profound impression on the jury. Forensic experts provided critical insights in the final days of the trial. They confirmed that Jamie's remains had been left in the woods shortly after her disappearance and that evidence pointed to the murder occurring near her home. These conclusions aligned with the prosecution's timeline of events. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. Their verdict would bring closure to a case that had spanned years, leaving Jamie's family, the public, and law enforcement on edge as they awaited the outcome. In October 2022, the jury delivered its verdict. David Haggard was found guilty of the second-degree murder of his stepsister, Jamie Haggard. The decision came after days of deliberation, during which jurors carefully reviewed all presented evidence, including physical items, witness testimonies, and expert analyses. For Jamie's family, this was a pivotal moment. After 6 years of uncertainty and a relentless fight for justice, they finally had an answer. Yet, while the verdict brought a measure of closure, it could not undo the loss her children and loved ones endured. In December 2022, the sentencing hearing took place. The judge sentenced David to 15 years in prison, emphasizing the severity of his crime but also taking into account his lack of prior criminal convictions. While the prosecution and Jamie's family considered the sentence fair, some in the community felt it was too lenient given the nature of the crime. Jamie's mother, close friends, and activists who had followed the case from the beginning attended the hearing. In her statement to the court, Jamie's mother said, "I hoped this day would never come, but now we know the truth. My daughter deserves so much more than what life gave her. We hope her story serves as a lesson for others." Throughout the trial and sentencing, David maintained his composure, showing little emotion. In his final statement, he reiterated his claim of innocence. His lawyers later filed an appeal, arguing that the evidence against him remained circumstantial and that public opinion had unduly influenced the verdict. However, prosecutors maintained that the evidence presented left no doubt of his guilt. As public interest in the case began to fade, its impact lingered. The story of Jamie Haggard became a sobering reminder of how unaddressed family conflicts can escalate into tragedy. Her case prompted widespread discussions in the media, social networks, and community forums about the importance of recognizing and addressing domestic violence. For Jamie's family, the next stage was learning to live with her absence while holding on to the justice they had fought so hard to achieve. Her daughters, now in the care of their grandmother, grew up cherishing the memory of their mother, whose strength and love for them became a guiding light in their lives. The case of Jamie Haggard left an indelible mark on those who knew her and on the history of Snohomish County. It served as a stark example of how unresolved family tensions can spiral into tragedy if left unchecked. Despite the pain of loss, Jamie's family, friends, and community drew lessons from her story, using them to prevent similar situations in the future. In honor of Jamie, her family established a foundation bearing her name. The foundation supported victims of domestic violence and conducted educational outreach. Schools in the county began hosting lectures to teach students how to recognize signs of abuse and seek help. Jamie's mother often said during her speeches, if someone had helped Jamie earlier, things might have turned out differently. The publicity surrounding Jamie's case also captured the attention of lawmakers. Several politicians and law enforcement officials advocated for stronger measures to prevent domestic violence. Proposals included streamlining the process for obtaining search warrants to enable faster police response to potential threats. Many of these initiatives were inspired by the family's determination to achieve justice for Jamie. For Jamie's daughters, her death was a profound loss. Yet, with the support of their grandmother and community, they grew up knowing their mother as a brave and loving woman who did everything she could for their happiness. The family worked tirelessly to provide them with care and stability, ensuring they had the chance to heal. David Haggard, convicted of his sister's murder, remained in prison, where he was serving his 15-year sentence. His name was never spoken again in the house where Jamie once lived. To the family, he was a reminder of the dangers of ignoring toxic relationships, even within the bounds of family. Jamie Haggard's story became a symbol of the fight for justice and the need to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Her death inspired many people in similar situations to seek help and to voice their fears. Though Jamie is no longer here, her name lives on, carried by those whose lives were changed by the lessons of her story. The case is closed, but Jamie's memory endures. Her life and the struggle for truth and justice by those who loved her serve as a lasting reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of standing up for those in need. The quiet town of Duluth, nestled on the northern shore of Lake Superior in Minnesota, became the scene of a tragedy in November 2024 that shook not only its residents but the entire nation. The events that unfolded in one of the city's residential neighborhoods raised profound questions about the fragility of the human psyche, the prevalence of domestic violence, and society's role in preventing such catastrophes. On November 7, 2024, Duluth police received the distressing call from a neighbor of the Nephew family. The man reported an eerie silence from the house after his knocks went unanswered. When officers arrived, they were met with a harrowing sight. The bodies of 5 people, including 2 young children, lay inside the home. The investigation quickly revealed the tragedy's origins within the family of Anthony Nephew, a 34-year-old Duluth resident. Among the deceased were his wife, Catherine, their son, Oliver, his former partner, Aaron Abramson, and their son, Jacob. Anthony himself was found with a gunshot wound, later determined by investigators to be self-inflicted. This shocking story ignited a wave of concern about how warning signs could have been missed. Media reports and public statements from those who knew Anthony shed light on disturbing aspects of his life, including his struggle with schizophrenia, strained family dynamics, and unresolved legal issues. As a man who had openly spoken about his mental health challenges, Anthony became a tragic symbol of society's inability to address such crises effectively. Despite his diagnoses and previous attempts to seek help, the system failed him in his moment of greatest need. This chapter poses crucial questions. What circumstances led to this tragic outcome? What warning signs were overlooked? And how can similar events be prevented in the future? Anthony Nephew was born and raised in Minnesota in a middle-class family. His childhood, though far from idyllic, offered no indication of the tragedies to come. Classmates remembered him as a quiet but friendly individual who preferred books over sports. After graduating high school, he pursued technical education and began working for a construction company. Anthony's personal life was fraught with challenges. In his youth, he met Erin Abramson, with whom he began a relationship. The couple had a son, Jacob, but their union was short-lived. Differences in temperament and conflicting parenting styles led to their separation. Nevertheless, Anthony tried to remain involved in Jacob's life, despite the difficulties posed by his strained relationship with Erin. Later, Anthony met Catherine, a woman who, according to friends, provided him with a sense of stability. They married and had a son, Oliver. Determined to be a devoted father, Anthony worked hard to fulfill his family responsibilities, even as he grappled with internal struggles. Yet beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary life lay deep-seated issues. In his early 20s, Anthony began to experience symptoms of mental illness. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, he faced periodic exacerbations of his condition over the years. While medication and therapy offered temporary relief, the illness remained a persistent and challenging presence in his life, affecting his relationships and daily existence. Catherine, as friends noted, tried her best to support her husband, but their marriage was not without its strains. Financial difficulties, frequent arguments, and the pressures of raising children added to the tension. Over time, Anthony's behavior became increasingly erratic, further destabilizing the household. Anthony also maintained contact with Erin and Jacob. Despite their complicated relationship, he continued to feel responsible for his elder son. Erin, however, was cautious in her interactions with Anthony, particularly during periods when he stopped taking his medication. The intersecting challenges of strained family ties and Anthony's ongoing battle with mental illness became pivotal factors that likely influenced the devastating events of November 2024. Anthony's nephew's battle with mental health began in his youth. At the age of 22, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia after experiencing auditory hallucinations and paranoid thoughts. Despite the severity of his condition, Anthony resisted acknowledging the problem and refused treatment for a long time. This reluctance stemmed not only from his internal fears but also from the stigma surrounding mental illness. In 2021, Anthony took a step that appeared to signal progress. He published an article in a local newspaper, candidly recounting his experience with schizophrenia. In the piece, he described how the illness had shaped his life and called for greater societal support for individuals with mental health challenges. The article resonated widely, with many in the community commending Anthony's courage and honesty. However, managing his illness in practice proved increasingly difficult. Although Anthony sought medical assistance at various times, his treatment was inconsistent. He often stopped taking his medications or attending therapy during periods when he felt his condition had improved. His paranoia, which grew more pronounced over the years, further exacerbated the situation. By 2023, Anthony was expressing fears of being watched and claimed that hidden cameras had been placed in his home. These statements alarmed his loved ones, but as is often the case, their concerns did not translate into decisive action. By 2024, Anthony's condition had deteriorated significantly. He began speaking of voices urging him to protect his family from imagined threats. These delusions were accompanied by episodes of aggression, particularly under stress. That summer, an incident occurred that should have been a turning point. In July 2024, Catherine's nephew called the police after Anthony threatened her with a knife during a family argument. He accused her of conspiring against him and declared that she had betrayed him. Police removed Anthony from the home, but he was later released without charges. This episode could have triggered meaningful intervention, yet the system failed once again. Despite these red flags, Anthony was able to obtain a firearms license. In September 2024, he purchased a gun, claiming it was to protect his family. This decision would prove catastrophic in the months to come. Anthony's mental state continued to unravel, and his efforts to cope fell woefully short. Those around him saw a man struggling to keep his head above water, but ultimately unable to overcome the fears and demons that consumed him. As the fateful November 2024 approached, Anthony Nephew's behavior grew increasingly alarming. Those close to him noticed his vacant stares, unsettling comments, and volatile mood swings. Yet no one could foresee the horrifying conclusion that lay ahead. The knife incident in July 2024 was the first major indicator that Anthony's situation was spiraling out of control. Catherine's call to the police should have prompted further action, but Anthony was released after only a brief detention. According to family acquaintances, his return home marked the beginning of a new wave of tension. Catherine feared for her safety and that of her children but, as friends reported, hesitated to escalate the situation by filing for divorce or seeking a restraining order. Anthony's growing obsession with external threats was another glaring red flag. He became preoccupied with political instability, frequently voicing fears about the dangers of the world. In conversations with friends, he confessed to feeling like a target. These comments were often dismissed as anxiety or overreactions to current events, but given his diagnosis, they were likely manifestations of worsening paranoia. One of the most troubling developments was Anthony's acquisition of a firearm. Despite his schizophrenia diagnosis and history of psychiatric treatment, the system failed to prevent him from legally purchasing a gun. In September 2024, he bought a handgun. When Catherine questioned his reasoning, he reassured her it was to protect their family. Erin Abramson, Anthony's former partner and the mother of their son Jacob, also grew increasingly concerned. She noticed unsettling changes in Anthony's demeanor during his interactions with Jacob. According to Erin, Anthony began making strange comments, avoided public meetings, and requested more private time with their son. Alarmed, she consulted a lawyer to explore restricting Anthony's access to Jacob, but legal proceedings were never initiated. Neighbors, too, began observing unusual behavior in Anthony. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, he rarely left the house and appeared visibly distressed when seen. One neighbor recalled Anthony stopping him on the street to talk about the importance of being prepared for anything, while showing off his new gun. Despite these unsettling encounters, no one could determine whether he was genuinely dangerous or merely eccentric. All of these warning signs seemed to form a clear picture of impending disaster. Yet neither friends, family, nor support systems were able or perhaps willing to take the steps necessary to prevent the unfolding tragedy. November 7, 2024, began like any other day for the residents of Duluth. No one in the quiet neighborhoods surrounding the Nephew household could have imagined the horror that was about to unfold, a tragedy that would soon shake the entire town. Around 9 a.m., neighbors noticed an unusual silence coming from the Nephew home. Typically, at that hour, the sounds of children's laughter or a television could be heard. But on this morning, everything seemed disturbingly still. The windows were tightly shut, and there were no visible signs of life. One concerned neighbor knocked on the door, but no one answered. By 11 a.m., the police received an alarming call. The neighbor reported his suspicions and mentioned a faint, strange odor emanating from the house, which was out of place for the area. Officers arrived shortly after. When repeated attempts to make contact went unanswered, they decided to force entry. What they found inside was a scene of unimaginable horror, shocking even to seasoned professionals. In one bedroom, the bodies of Catherine Nephew and their 3-year-old son, Oliver, were discovered. Both had been fatally shot, likely in their sleep. In another room, Erin Abramson and her son, Jacob, were found, their lifeless bodies suggesting they had no time to react or resist. In an adjacent room, police found Anthony Nephew lying on the floor with a gunshot wound to the head. A handgun, purchased by Anthony just 2 months earlier, lay next to his body. The initial investigation quickly pieced together a grim narrative. Anthony had murdered his wife, children, and former partner before turning the weapon on himself. The evidence at the scene suggested the shootings occurred in the early hours of the morning. Anthony appeared to have shot Catherine and Oliver first, then moved to the room where Erin and Jacob were staying, before finally taking his own life. Yet, despite the horrifying clarity of the events, critical questions remained unanswered. What had driven Anthony to commit such a heinous act? A note found near his body offered only fragmented insights. Scrawled with incoherent phrases, it mentioned the need to protect his family and voices that wouldn't leave him alone. The message highlighted how profoundly his deteriorating mental state had shaped the tragedy. News of the incident spread rapidly, becoming the leading story across Minnesota. The community was left reeling. Neighbors and acquaintances shared memories of the family. Catherine, remembered as a devoted wife and mother who tirelessly supported her husband, Oliver and Jacob, two vibrant boys with their entire lives ahead of them, and Erin, a determined and caring woman who did everything she could to provide for her son. The day of the tragedy left behind countless questions. Why had the system failed to intervene? Why hadn't anyone stopped Anthony, despite the numerous warning signs of his worsening condition? The tragedy at the Nephew household sent shockwaves to Duluth and beyond. Residents were left grappling with the magnitude of what had happened, asking themselves whether the warning signs had been missed and how similar events could be prevented in the future. In the days following the incident, a makeshift memorial began to take shape outside the Nephew home. Flowers, candles, toys, and heartfelt notes were left by mourners, alongside photos of the family and children's drawings expressing sorrow and solidarity. Friends, colleagues, and neighbors of Catherine and Erin remembered them as kind and resilient women who gave everything for their children. Local authorities were quick to respond. The city administration announced a thorough investigation not only into the crime itself but also into the events leading up to it. Particular attention was given to how Anthony had managed to obtain a firearm despite his diagnosis and previous threats. Mental health advocacy groups seized the opportunity to draw attention to the systemic issues surrounding the diagnosis and treatment of severe mental illnesses. Articles and reports flooded local media, highlighting the need for accessible mental health care and robust support systems. Experts emphasized that such tragedies rarely occur in isolation but are the culmination of systemic failures in medical and social services. The actions or perceived inactions of Anthony's loved ones also became a topic of heated debate. Some argued that family and friends should have taken his claims of hearing voices and sensing threats more seriously. Others pointed out that Catherine had done everything in her power to protect herself and her children but had faced insurmountable barriers within the system. Law enforcement agencies also faced criticism. Many recalled the July 2024 incident, when Anthony had threatened Catherine with a knife. Critics argued that this episode should have prompted more serious intervention, such as his hospitalization or mandatory treatment, but instead, the opportunity was missed. Amid the public outcry, the city organized several events to honor the victim's memory. One such event, a candlelight vigil, was held at the school Jacob attended. Dozens of people gathered to light candles, share memories, and offer their condolences to the grieving relatives. The tragedy spurred a broader conversation within the community about how to better support individuals with mental health challenges and how to prevent violence. Yet even as discussions continued, the residents of Duluth and the families of the victims were left searching for answers to the painful questions left in the wake of this unimaginable loss. The tragedy within the Nephew family forced society and experts to search for explanations and analyze how such a horrific incident could have occurred. The discourse centered around three critical aspects: the role of mental health, the actions of the legal system, and the state of support for individuals in crisis. One of the main points of discussion was the state of psychiatric care. Anthony Nephew had a confirmed diagnosis of schizophrenia, but his treatment was sporadic at best. Experts noted that this situation is common among individuals with severe mental illnesses. During periods of remission, patients often stop taking their medication, increasing the risk of relapse. Furthermore, the doctors treating Anthony were unable to provide consistent oversight due to the overburdened healthcare system and a lack of resources for long-term patient monitoring. Many argued for improved collaboration between medical institutions and law enforcement to ensure that individuals with severe diagnoses receive both medical and social support. The fact that Anthony was able to legally purchase a firearm despite his psychiatric diagnosis sparked widespread outrage. In Minnesota, as in many other U.S. states, background checks for gun buyers often fail to identify individuals with mental health issues. Critics emphasize that authorities should have paid closer attention to Anthony's history, particularly after the incident where he threatened his wife. They argued that law enforcement and firearm regulators could have prevented the tragedy by denying Anthony access to weapons. Equally significant was the debate over the role of family and community in preventing such tragedies. Many questioned why Anthony's friends, relatives, and colleagues failed to recognize the danger he posed. However, experts reminded the public that such situations often go unnoticed due to shame, fear, or a lack of knowledge about how to respond appropriately. Catherine's role, in particular, was scrutinized as both a tragic figure and a symbol of those trapped in abusive situations. Her story highlighted how victims of domestic violence often face barriers that prevent them from escaping fear for their children's safety, a desire to preserve the family, and systemic shortcomings in providing adequate protection. The tragedy in Duluth was a painful lesson for all. It underscored the need for a systemic approach to addressing mental health issues, one that involves collaboration among medical, social, and legal services. In the months following the events, Minnesota authorities began revisiting policies regarding gun access for individuals with mental health diagnoses. Programs were initiated to train law enforcement and healthcare workers to recognize warning signs and intervene before violence escalates. Yet, the question that lingered in the minds of Duluth's residents was painfully simple: could Catherine, Aaron, Oliver, and Jacob have been saved? While that question remains unanswered, the lessons learned from this tragedy may help prevent future cases. The story of Anthony Nephew and his family is a heartbreaking reminder of the vulnerabilities in the system. It serves as a stark testament that behind every statistic are real lives and futures that deserve to be protected. The tragedy that unfolded in Anthony Nephew's home cast a long shadow over Duluth. The loss of 5 lives, including 2 children, was not only a personal catastrophe for their loved ones but also a profound wound for the entire community. The aftermath reverberated on both individual and systemic levels, prompting changes in approaches to mental health care and violence prevention. One of the most significant outcomes of the tragedy was the increased focus on the diagnosis, treatment, and monitoring of individuals with severe mental illnesses. Minnesota authorities announced a review of the state's mental health services, emphasizing preventive care. Additional funding was allocated to crisis centers capable of responding quickly to situations like the one in the Nephew family. A newly formed task force recommended mandatory collaboration between law enforcement, healthcare providers, and family protection services to ensure warning signs such as the knife incident in July 2024 would not go unaddressed in the future. Anthony's legal purchase of a firearm also became a catalyst for change. While background checks were already in place, discussions began at the state level about tightening regulations, particularly for individuals with mental health issues. One proposal called for integrating medical records into the background check database to prevent similar cases. This idea, however, sparked controversy. Opponents argued that such measures could stigmatize individuals with mental health conditions, many of whom pose no threat. Supporters, on the other hand, insisted that firearm access for such individuals must be strictly controlled to prioritize public safety. Duluth found ways to honor the memory of Catherine, Aaron, Oliver, and Jacob. A memorial was established in a park near their home, dedicated to the victims of domestic violence and family tragedies. A commemorative plaque was installed, and several trees were planted to symbolize hope and resilience. Jacob's school also ensured his memory lived on. A scholarship in his name was created for students who exemplify kindness and compassion toward their peers. Teachers and classmates remembered Jacob as a bright, gentle boy who loved to draw and dreamed of becoming an architect. The stories of Catherine Nephew and Aaron Abramson became symbols for many women facing domestic violence. Local support organizations began using their names in campaigns to raise awareness about the importance of seeking help early. This tragedy served as a painful reminder of the need to create safe conditions for women and children. Despite Catherine and Aaron's efforts to protect their families, they were unable to overcome the systemic failures and the escalating threats posed by Anthony. The case of Anthony Nephew revealed how multiple systemic breakdowns from mental health care to legal oversight can culminate in catastrophe. This story left scars that will never fully heal for those who knew the victims. However, it also provided an opportunity to rethink approaches to crucial issues like mental health, family safety, and gun control. Duluth continues to move forward, but the memory of the tragedy remains etched in the hearts of its residents. The story of Anthony Nephew and his family now serves as a powerful reminder of the need for swift and decisive action to prevent similar tragedies in the future. A dark night in Salt Lake City suddenly turned into a nightmare for the Smart family. 14-year-old Elizabeth vanished from her bedroom, while her younger sister, an unwilling witness, froze in terror beneath the covers. Who could have dared to break into their home and abduct the girl, leaving her family in utter despair? A massive search operation was launched, yet the abductors always seemed one step ahead. 9 months of fear, hope, and relentless pursuit. This is a story that shocked the world and proved that resilience can triumph over darkness. Elizabeth Ann Smart, a 14-year-old girl from Salt Lake City, Utah, lived in a large and loving family where she was the eldest of 6 children. The Smart family was well known for their deep religiosity, active involvement in the community, and the harmonious atmosphere of their home. Elizabeth was a talented young girl with a passion for music and sports, her future shining with promise. June 5, 2002, began as an ordinary day for the Smart family. Elizabeth spent the evening with her family before retiring to her bedroom, which she shared with her younger sister, 9-year-old Mary Catherine. The night was calm, with no sign of the tragedy that was about to unfold. At around 2 a.m., danger entered the Smart household. An unknown man broke in through a window leading to the living room. Armed with a knife, he moved silently, appearing to know exactly where he was headed. The intruder entered the girl's bedroom and woke Elizabeth, commanding her to follow him. He threatened her with the knife, warning that he would kill her and her entire family if she screamed or attempted to escape. Mary Catherine woke to the sounds of whispering in footsteps. Frozen with fear, she watched the scene from beneath her blanket, her instincts urging her to feign sleep to avoid becoming the next target. Despite her terror, she managed to observe a few critical details. The kidnapper's voice was low but assertive, and his manner of speaking felt eerily familiar. Obeying the man's orders, Elizabeth followed him. He led her through the house, bypassing the rooms where her parents and siblings were sleeping, and took her out into the backyard. From that moment, Elizabeth vanished without a trace. At dawn, when her parents discovered Elizabeth's absence, panic erupted. Lois Smart, her mother, immediately called the police. A frantic search of the house revealed no signs of forced entry or struggle. The kidnapper had been so meticulous that both the family and authorities were left bewildered. Mary Catherine's account became the sole clue to initiate the investigation. She mentioned men the family had previously hired for odd jobs around the house and recalled the name of one of them, Emmanuel. She was certain the voice of the abductor resembled that of this man. However, it would take time for the police to connect this lead to a real person. That night marked the beginning of a harrowing ordeal for the Smart family and for Elizabeth herself, who found herself in the clutches of a ruthless kidnapper whose motives and plans were yet to be uncovered. The disappearance of Elizabeth Smart sent shockwaves to her close-knit community. From the early morning hours of June 5, 2002, the Smart family and law enforcement launched an extensive search. Volunteers, consisting of neighbors and friends, scoured nearby areas, parks, forests, and vacant lots around Salt Lake City. Yet, time worked against them. With every passing moment, the likelihood of finding Elizabeth grew slimmer. The police promptly held a press conference to draw public attention to the case. Elizabeth's parents, Lois and Ed Smart, made an emotional plea to the kidnapper on camera, begging for their daughter's safe return. Lois's heartfelt words echoed across the nation, "Please, we will do whatever you want, just bring our girl home." This poignant appeal garnered an outpouring of sympathy and support from millions of Americans. Elizabeth's younger sister, Mary Catherine, played a crucial role in the investigation. She recalled that the abductor had addressed Elizabeth by name, suggesting that he knew her beforehand. Furthermore, she insisted she recognized his voice. Summoning her courage, Mary Catherine shared her suspicion with the police. The kidnapper might be a man named Emmanuel, who had once done work around their home. Following this lead, investigators began scrutinizing everyone who had prior contact with the Smart family. However, without a full name or an address for Emmanuel, the trail proved elusive. Several composite sketches were created, but they were too generic to produce a breakthrough. Meanwhile, the media launched an aggressive campaign. Television networks, radio stations, and newspapers circulated Elizabeth's photograph in the hope that someone might recognize her. Posters bearing her image were plastered across Salt Lake City. Alongside her pictures, depictions and descriptions of a potential suspect were also distributed. Despite these efforts, the investigation stalled in its early weeks. False leads and unsubstantiated sightings trickled in. In one instance, a witness claimed to have seen a girl resembling Elizabeth dining with a suspicious couple in a neighboring state, but the lead turned out to be a dead end. Amid the media frenzy, dangerous theories began to surface. Some speculated that a family member or someone within their inner circle might have been involved in the abduction. This speculation sowed mistrust between the police and the Smarts, despite the family's unwavering cooperation with the investigation. Still, the Smart family refused to give up hope. They continued working with law enforcement, organizing rallies, and maintaining a strong public presence. Lois and Ed Smart gave daily interviews, emphasizing their belief that Elizabeth was still alive. Unbeknownst to everyone, Elizabeth was being held mere miles from her home. Trapped in isolation, she was forced to comply with the demands of her captors, Brian David Mitchell and his wife, Wanda Barzee, who maintained a terrifying grip on her life and safety. Yet these details remain hidden from the police, who pressed on, determined to uncover any clue that might lead them to her. Weeks after the abduction, Mary Catherine remembered additional details about Emmanuel. She recounted that he not only worked around their house but also spoke frequently about religion, coming across as eccentric and peculiar. With her assistance, the family helped the police develop a more accurate composite sketch. While this new information was a significant step forward, months of painstaking investigation lay ahead before justice could finally be served. Elizabeth Smart's life was irrevocably altered the moment she was taken. Her kidnapper, Brian David Mitchell, who called himself Emmanuel, led her into the mountains just miles from her home. There, hidden from prying eyes, lay a makeshift camp where his wife and accomplice, Wanda Barzee, awaited. The camp, a crude survivalist haven, consisted of ramshackle tents and improvised shelters that offered little more than protection from the elements. Yet it symbolized the isolation that would define Elizabeth's existence. On the very first night, Mitchell subjected her to a twisted marriage ceremony, claiming she was now his spiritual wife, ordained by God. Under the guise of this deranged ritual, he began abusing her, insisting that her submission was divinely decreed. Elizabeth's captivity was both physical and psychological. Mitchell wielded threats against her family like a weapon, ensuring her compliance. He repeatedly reminded her that any attempt to escape would result in him returning to the Smart home to harm her loved ones. These threats, reinforced by his fanatical religious rhetoric, rendered the idea of escape unthinkable. Wanda Barzee, while subservient to Mitchell, played an active role in Elizabeth's imprisonment. She participated in the abuse and closely monitored Elizabeth to ensure her obedience. Barzee viewed Mitchell as a prophet fulfilling a divine mission, wholeheartedly embracing his warped beliefs and lifestyle. Elizabeth's days were filled with fear and degradation. Forced to wear long, concealing robes that covered her face and body, she became unrecognizable to anyone who might see her beyond the camp. The harsh conditions of the mountains added to her suffering oppressive heat in the summer, bitter cold in the winter. Malnutrition became yet another ordeal, as Mitchell and Barzy lived on meager rations obtained sporadically. Even in these inhuman conditions, Elizabeth clung to hope. She drew strength from memories of her family and the life she had once known, using them as a lifeline to maintain her sanity. While outwardly compliant, she nurtured an inner resilience, determined to survive. Mitchell occasionally took Elizabeth and Barzy into nearby towns to scavenge for food and supplies. During these excursions, they walked among people in stores and public spaces, but Elizabeth was so heavily disguised that no one recognized her. Mitchell's threats were ever present, a chilling reminder that her silence was the price of her family's safety. Periods of isolation alternated with Mitchell's fanatical sermons about his prophetic plans. He claimed he was destined to gather a group of spiritual wives and create a new kingdom. Elizabeth, he declared, was the first of these wives. His delusional proclamations only highlighted his unpredictability and the grave danger he posed. However, the kidnappers began making mistakes. Their appearances in public places drew attention, and reports of a strange couple, accompanied by a veiled girl, began to trickle in. While the information was vague and unsubstantiated, it marked the beginning of a trail for law enforcement to follow. Elizabeth endured this nightmare for months, each day stretching into what felt like an eternity. Yet, despite the unrelenting darkness, a fragile spark of hope remained alive within her. She held on to the belief that one day, she would return to her family. Months passed after Elizabeth Smart's abduction, and the investigation remained mired in stagnation. Despite a widespread media campaign that distributed her photo and description, none of the tips received led to a breakthrough. Law enforcement found itself chasing false leads and speculative theories, losing precious time in the process. One of the most significant early missteps involved the investigation's misplaced focus on Richard Ricci, a handyman who had previously worked at the Smarts' home. Ricci's criminal history, which included theft, and his familiarity with the property made him a prime suspect. Police detained him for questioning and searched his home, yet no evidence connected him to Elizabeth's disappearance. Nevertheless, he remained the primary suspect for weeks. This misjudgment diverted substantial resources away from pursuing the actual kidnappers. Tragedy struck when Ricci died from a brain aneurysm while in custody, leaving investigators without their sole suspect and no closer to uncovering the truth. His death was a devastating blow to the investigation, further delaying progress. Meanwhile, despair grew within the Smart family. Their faith in law enforcement faltered, prompting Lois and Ed Smart to take matters into their own hands. They organized community meetings, distributed flyers, and sought support from religious and charitable organizations. Their unwavering determination kept Elizabeth's case in the public eye. A pivotal development came with the release of a composite sketch based on Mary Catherine's recollections. Over time, her memory of the man known as Emmanuel grew clearer. The sketch was widely circulated in newspapers and on television, gradually gaining recognition. Still, no one was yet able to connect it to a real person. The investigation was further hampered by a flood of false reports and sightings from concerned citizens. Witnesses from across the country claimed to have seen Elizabeth, leading police to chase leads that often turned out to be dead ends. One particularly high-profile misstep occurred in August 2002, when a man in Salt Lake City reported seeing Elizabeth with a couple resembling Mitchell and Barzy. The tip caused a media frenzy but ultimately proved unfounded, as the witness had merely mistaken strangers for the kidnappers. Meanwhile, Brian David Mitchell continued to move with Elizabeth and Barzy, deliberately avoiding areas where they might be recognized. His eccentric religious declarations and unusual behavior often drew attention. In several instances, people noticed the veiled girl accompanying the pair, but their observations were either not reported to the police or dismissed as unsubstantiated. A critical flaw in the investigation was the lack of coordination among law enforcement agencies and an inability to efficiently process public tips. While the search remained stalled, Elizabeth languished in captivity, just miles from her family's home. Refusing to give up, the Smart family enlisted private investigators and sought assistance from national organizations dedicated to finding missing children. These efforts ensured that Elizabeth's case stayed in the public spotlight, a factor that would later prove instrumental in her rescue. At this stage, however, the investigation was still at an impasse. Mitchell and Barzy, emboldened by law enforcement struggles, felt secure in their actions, while police remained focused on false leads, missing crucial opportunities to bring Elizabeth home. While police continued searching for Elizabeth Smart in the vicinity of Salt Lake City, Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzy began moving to avoid detection. Aware of the risk of staying near the abduction site, they decided to travel further afield. Elizabeth's disguise, consisting of long white robes, a cloak, and a veil, rendered her virtually unrecognizable, allowing the kidnappers to travel freely without arousing suspicion. Their first significant journey took them to California. Traveling mostly on foot, they occasionally camped in remote areas or stayed in deserted locations. Mitchell proclaimed that he was on a divine mission to preach the word of God, with Elizabeth and Barzy as his chosen companions. His religious rhetoric served as a tool of manipulation, reinforcing his control over Elizabeth and compelling her compliance. In California, they ventured into towns to procure food and beg for money. Mitchell often delivered street sermons, his unkempt beard, tattered clothing, and eccentric demeanor drawing attention. Yet no one suspected that one of his companions was a missing girl listed on federal alerts. Elizabeth occasionally attempted subtle signals to those around her, but Mitchell's constant threats of violence against her family kept her paralyzed with fear. He repeatedly warned her that any escape attempt would result in him returning to kill her loved ones, maintaining her in a state of perpetual terror. Over the months, Mitchell moved between Utah, California, and Nevada, adhering to a strategy of isolation and frequent relocation. His attempts to recruit new, spiritual wives led him to approach young women on the streets, but these efforts proved unsuccessful. His behavior further underscored his fanaticism and his willingness to break societal and legal boundaries in pursuit of his delusions. By December 2002, Mitchell decided to return to Salt Lake City, viewing it as the symbolic culmination of his spiritual journey. By this point, Elizabeth had been in captivity for over 6 months. Though she remained resilient in spirit, her isolation deepened with each passing day. Returning to Utah significantly increased the risk of capture. By then, Elizabeth's photograph was known to nearly everyone in Salt Lake City. Posters with her image adorned public spaces, and announcements about her disappearance played regularly on radio and television. Nevertheless, Mitchell, emboldened by his self-assurance, continued to frequent populated areas, relying on Elizabeth's disguise and silence to keep them safe. A pivotal moment occurred during a visit to the Salt Lake City Library, where the group's odd appearance drew attention. Elizabeth, entirely veiled, sat quietly, avoiding eye contact and exuding a sense of profound despair. A library patron, unsettled by the trio, reported them to the police. However, due to a lack of concrete descriptions or evidence, the tip failed to lead to their capture. Mitchell's behavior grew increasingly reckless. His impassioned religious rants, eccentric mannerisms, and peculiar appearance began to draw more attention. People started to notice the strange group, and reports of a suspicious man accompanied by 2 women began trickling into law enforcement with greater frequency. While Mitchell's interstate travels helped him evade capture temporarily, they also heightened the likelihood of exposure. For Elizabeth, these journeys were another chapter of her imprisonment, but by early 2003, the tides were beginning to turn. The net around Mitchell and Barzy was tightening, and Elizabeth's ordeal was nearing a crucial turning point. By early 2003, Elizabeth Smart's case remained unresolved, but pivotal events began to shift the tide. After months of frustration and false leads, the investigation refocused on the suspect mentioned by Mary Catherine, Emmanuel. The turning point came with the release of a composite sketch based on her recollections. In late February 2003, Lois Smart saw the sketch and immediately recognized the man who had once worked at their home. He had introduced himself as Emmanuel, claiming to be a wandering preacher. The Smart family contacted the police and urged the media to circulate the sketch widely. This image became a breakthrough, as individuals familiar with Brian David Mitchell recognized him and reported his true identity along with stories of his erratic behavior. The public now played a critical role. In March 2003, a Salt Lake City resident, upon seeing the sketch, realized it resembled a man he had seen delivering religious sermons on the street. He passed this tip to law enforcement, reigniting the investigation. On March 12, 2003, the decisive moment arrived. Mitchell, Barzy, and Elizabeth were walking through Sandy, a suburb of Salt Lake City, heading toward the city center. A passerby, who had seen the published sketch, recognized Mitchell and immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers intercepted the trio. Elizabeth, still veiled, initially refused to identify herself, paralyzed by the fear of Mitchell's lingering threats. However, after persistent questioning from one officer, she finally revealed her name: "I am Elizabeth Smart." The news spread across the nation like wildfire. After 9 harrowing months of captivity, Elizabeth was rescued. Her parents, who had never lost hope, embraced her with tears and relief as they were reunited. Mitchell and Barzy were arrested on the spot and taken into custody, where interrogations began. Mitchell continued to insist that his actions were guided by divine command, framing his crimes as part of a supposed spiritual mission. Barzy supported his delusions, denying her culpability entirely. Despite everything she had endured, Elizabeth demonstrated remarkable strength and composure. She provided investigators with a detailed account of her captivity, describing how Mitchell had exploited religious dogma to justify his abuse. Her testimony would later become the foundation for the prosecution's case. Elizabeth's rescue was the result of unwavering collaboration between her family, the media, and the public. Individuals who noticed Mitchell and Barzy's unusual behavior and reported their sightings played a vital role in bringing Elizabeth home. The moment marked not just the end of Elizabeth's ordeal, but also the triumph of perseverance and hope, uniting a community and a nation in celebration of her safe return. Elizabeth Smart's return home marked the long-awaited end of her 9-month ordeal, but it was also the beginning of a complex process of investigation, justice, and healing. Upon her rescue, law enforcement faced the task of confirming her identity and gathering the evidence needed to bring Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzy to justice. Despite the fear and psychological suppression instilled by months of abuse and manipulation, Elizabeth swiftly confirmed her name. Her detailed descriptions of her captors, their mountain camp, and their treatment of her provided crucial evidence for the impending legal proceedings. Her clear and precise recollections would later prove instrumental in securing convictions. Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzy were immediately arrested. Police began searching the camp in the wooded area near the Smart home. There, they found tents, personal items belonging to Elizabeth, and Mitchell's religious texts and notes, which contained his deranged, prophetic teachings. These writings revealed his intention to continue abducting young girls to build his group of spiritual wives. Elizabeth's rescue quickly became a national story. Her return home was broadcast across all major news outlets, capturing the attention of millions. Her parents, Lois and Ed Smart, held a press conference to express their profound gratitude to the police, volunteers, and everyone who had never given up hope. For the Smart family, this was a moment of immense joy but also the start of a long road to recovery. Elizabeth needed protection from the intense media scrutiny, as well as professional support to address the deep psychological scars left by her captivity. Her parents decided to prioritize her well-being, limiting her public appearances in the months following her rescue. One of the most pressing questions after Elizabeth's return was how she had managed to survive in such dire circumstances. Elizabeth explained that her unwavering faith in her family and hope for a future reunion had sustained her. Her resilience and ability to preserve her sanity in inhumane conditions amazed even the most seasoned investigators. The investigation into the handling of the case also began. Many criticized the prolonged duration of the search, particularly the delay in identifying Mitchell as a suspect. It became clear that Mitchell's arrest could have occurred much earlier if the composite sketch and information from the Smart family had been processed more efficiently. Mitchell, detained alongside Barzy, continued to claim that his actions were part of a divine mission. However, it quickly became evident that his religious justifications would not shield him from accountability. Barzy, though less defiant, also denied her guilt, justifying her actions by citing her complete subservience to Mitchell. March 12, 2003, became a symbol of the power of hope and collective determination. On this day, Elizabeth not only regained her freedom but also inspired millions with her story of survival, demonstrating that even in the darkest of times, faith and resilience can prevail. Following the arrest of Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzy, the arduous process of holding them accountable began. The case drew national attention, with the public and media closely following the proceedings. Central to the trial was the question of the mental state of both defendants and their fitness to stand trial. Mitchell persisted in claiming that his actions were part of a divine mission. He refused to cooperate with his attorneys and frequently disrupted court proceedings, demonstrating open contempt for the law. During hearings, he sang hymns and shouted religious slogans, ultimately leading to his removal from the courtroom on multiple occasions. Court-appointed experts began evaluating his mental health to determine if he had been sane at the time of his crimes. Barzy, too, argued that she acted under Mitchell's influence and at his command. However, the investigation revealed her active role in Elizabeth's abduction and abuse. Barzy not only helped confine Elizabeth but also supported Mitchell's distorted beliefs, framing their actions as sanctioned by God. The proceedings were repeatedly delayed due to debates over the defendant's mental fitness. Psychiatric evaluations diagnosed Mitchell with a delusional disorder rooted in religious fanaticism but concluded that he understood the nature of his actions and was competent to stand trial. Barzy was deemed mentally fit as well, though she was diagnosed with a dependent personality disorder, explaining her subservience to Mitchell. Barzy was the first to face sentencing. In 2009, she entered into a plea agreement, admitting her role in the crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her cooperation confirmed critical details of the abduction and abuse Elizabeth endured. Barzy was sentenced to 15 years in prison, some of which she had already served by the time of sentencing. Mitchell's trial began in 2010. His defense relied on claims of insanity, but prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including Elizabeth's own testimony. Courageously, Elizabeth recounted her harrowing experiences, directly confronting her abductor without hesitation. Her composure and resilience left a powerful impression on both the judge and jury. The prosecution argued that Mitchell was a calculating criminal who used religion as a facade to justify his heinous acts. Evidence revealed that he had meticulously planned Elizabeth's abduction and intended to capture additional victims to expand his so-called spiritual family. The court found him guilty on all charges, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and unlawful detention. In December 2010, Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This verdict marked the final chapter of his case, bringing the Smart family a measure of justice and closure. Elizabeth Smart played a pivotal role throughout the legal proceedings. Her testimony not only secured the convictions but also stood as a testament to her extraordinary strength and perseverance. By sharing her story, she highlighted the crucial role of familial and community support in the healing process. The public response to the verdicts was overwhelmingly positive. The Smart case became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of collective effort between law enforcement, the media, and the community. It also served as a poignant reminder of the need for continued improvements in protecting vulnerable children and preventing similar tragedies. After her rescue, Elizabeth Smart embarked on a long journey of recovery. Despite the horrors she endured, she astonished those around her with her determination to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Her family played a vital role, providing unwavering support and shielding her from excessive media scrutiny, allowing Elizabeth to focus on her personal healing. She returned to school and resumed her passion for music, which had always been an important part of her life. Over time, Elizabeth began sharing her story to help others who had faced similar tragedies. In 2011, she established the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, aimed at raising awareness about child abductions and supporting survivors of abuse. A significant milestone came with the publication of her memoir, My Story, in 2013. In it, Elizabeth candidly recounted her ordeal and the events leading to her rescue. The book became a bestseller and brought widespread attention to the issue of child abuse and abduction. She also became a sought-after speaker, addressing conferences and public forums to advocate for better support systems for survivors. The Smart case had a profound impact on legislation and public initiatives. Her abduction prompted the enactment of laws to strengthen child protection measures, such as improved alert systems for missing children and stricter background checks for individuals working with families. Elizabeth worked closely with national and international organizations to develop effective programs for locating missing children. Her story inspired millions, emphasizing the importance of maintaining hope even in the darkest of circumstances. In her personal life, Elizabeth found happiness. In 2012, she married Matthew Gilmore, and together they built a family. Despite her past, she focuses on the present and future, dedicating herself to charitable efforts and raising her children. Elizabeth Smart's story has become a symbol of resilience, strength, and faith. She has shown that even after enduring unimaginable suffering, it is possible not only to heal but to channel one's experiences into helping others. Through her advocacy, she continues to shine a light on the importance of protecting the vulnerable and supporting those on their path to recovery.